Hey, Regen family. Hope everybody's doing great. My name is Sherry Lord, and I have been asked to do a video about what God has been doing in my life. So when Sonny first asked me to do this, I was really excited, and I took a day or so to think about, what can I share? What's been going on? And this phrase, "burn the ships," just kept going through my head over and over again. And it's a song that I had heard. And I thought, can I share on this, and do I really want to? Because burn the ships to me means that retreat is not an option, that I have to leave the person that I was before I came to Christ in the past. She's dead and gone. In order to do that, I have to continually destroy the means of return back to that old person, so that way I can be remade in his image that he sees in me, even if I can't see her. So my anxiety was raised about having to share on this, because if I'm being real honest, what God's been doing has not been the most warm and fuzzy period of my life, and I don't like to be vulnerable. But I recognize that as uncomfortable as this may be for me, this is what I was given. And I remember preachers from my past saying, don't ever sit on your testimony. So I'm not going to sit on my testimony. It's almost as if God is saying to me, this is how you're craving after me, Sherry, and you don't have to be afraid. So, here goes. Right after Easter, I got really depressed. The shutdown, the stay-at-home orders, this all condensed my world down to just inside my house. And this caused things in my life that had been dormant for a long time to come back with a vengeance. And I had to figure out how to deal with these things. And I had to figure it out pretty quick. There were multiple events that week after Easter that happened all at once that led to this. But there was one day I hung up the phone after talking to someone, and I felt completely isolated and lonely. And I had not experienced loneliness in a very long time. But not only that, I was withdrawing, I was sad, I was irritable, throw in some crippling anxiety and the fear of the future, and I was facing a pretty dark place. So for me, loneliness and isolation have always been fertile grounds for shame and guilt. And when I start entertaining those feelings, well, that's when I wake up one morning feeling like the walls are closing in on me. The house has shrank by 10 sizes, and if I don't get out of it, I might implode. I start to feel cut off from others, even in a room full of people. And I know rationally that this comes from guilt, from fear of being hurt, from self-criticism and negative thinking. But I will convince myself that I'm not worthy of the love and acceptance of the people who are honestly trying to help me. But then God shows up, just like he always does, and he sends somebody to sit with me in the dark so I don't have to be alone. As someone so kindly pointed out to me in the middle of this, without even realizing that's what they were doing. So I heard this song, "Burn the Ships," a few weeks before all this happened. And the chorus goes, we've got to burn the ships, cut the ties, send a flame into the night, say a prayer, turn the tide, dry your tears, and wave goodbye. And now that's going in a constant loop in my head. And then Tracy does this sermon where he has us burn something in a candle at the end. If you didn't see that, it was really powerful. But God always has a plan. And for me, that plan is usually revealed through music in some way because it's what I listen to. But one morning I was sitting at my table and I was trying to read that Core 52 book. And I became so frustrated. I was getting nothing out of this book. I hadn't been for several days. I couldn't focus on it and forget learning a memory verse. So I just closed the book and hit pause on that study for a while. And then I turned and I opened my Bible and I prayed and I let the Lord lead. Now, I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew that I was looking for something. And this song kept going through my head, so I thought, well, let's start with the lyrics of this song. And one of the lyrics is, if you need a refuge, I will be right here until the end. So I studied about God being our refuge, and it's no surprise I found Psalm 46, verse 1. It's also not a coincidence that a few weeks later, Tracy is teaching about that particular verse for 2 weeks in a row. So what I learned when I prayed about this and I looked at it in the context of what was going on in my life is that strength and refuge can come from some pretty unexpected places. It can come from daily conversations, an unexpected morning Zoom chat, from people who reach out to me to tell me that maybe I made a small impact in their life, advice from an old friend, or challenges from a mentor who is not afraid to hold me accountable. But piece by piece, as I start to seek refuge and strength in Jesus, the darkness starts to clear. And then comes my favorite line in the song. We can dance upon the heartache, so light a match, leave the past, burn the ships, and don't you look back. So I start looking up, rejoicing in the storm. And I find a lot, but there were two passages that really stood out to me, and the first one is Romans 5, verses 3 through 5, and this is from the Message Paraphrase version. There's more to come. We continue to shout our praise even when we're hemmed with troubles, because we know how troubles can develop passionate patience in us, and how that patience, in turn, forges the tempered steel of virtue, keeping us alert for whatever God will do next. In alert expectancy such as this, we're never left feeling shortchanged. Quite the contrary, we can't round up enough containers to hold everything that God so generously pours into our lives through the Holy Spirit. So this image of dancing on the heartache tells me that sorrow is not in and of itself bad. And sometimes it's beneficial. Listen to what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 5 through 10. This is also from the Message Paraphrase. I know I distressed you greatly with my letter. Although I felt awful at the time, I don't feel bad at all now that I see how it turned out. The letter upset you, but only for a while. And now I'm glad. Not that you were upset, but that you were jarred into turning things around. You let the distress bring you to God, not drive you from Him. The result was all gain, no loss. Distress that drives us to God does that. It turns us around, it gets us back in the way of salvation, and we will never regret that kind of pain. But those who let distress drive them away from God are full of regrets and end up on a deathbed of regrets. So I've read this passage before, but it never really had this impact on me. But then God reveals to us what we need in the moment. And my takeaway from this is that I have to learn to praise Him in the storm so I can learn to dance in the rain and dance on the heartache. So here's the hope in the song. It comes closer to the end where it says, so long to shame, walk through the sorrow, out of the fire into tomorrow. What I found is there's no shame in the fear that I was experiencing, and I had to let that shame go and sit with the fear and the discomfort so I could grow and learn to trust the Lord and get through tough times. And that way I would come out on the other side renewed and stronger in my own faith. So during this, Psalm 23 is what kind of came back to me. And the last part of it, especially from verse 4 on, where it says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff comfort me. Thou preparest a table for me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now, I hadn't thought about Psalm 23 in a long time, but back in 2007, when I was taking care of my grandmother full-time and I was working from home and I couldn't get out to go to church, lonely and isolated, it's a theme in my life occasionally, I was listening to a radio series from a local pastor, and it was about Psalm 23. And I had a light bulb moment listening to that, because I realized that this is all temporary. And my hope is not here on earth, because this is not my home. My hope lies in heaven with Jesus. And one of these days, I get to be there with Jesus. So thinking about that, I was forced, during this pandemic to sit with my feelings, to really feel them, and to identify them and understand where they came from. But I have been able to light the match, leave the past, and burn the ships. And so the challenge for me is going to be to not pick up the broken pieces of the past, to not look back, and to choose joy every day. This much I have learned. God has provided a comforter who is our refuge. He wants us to rejoice in the storms, knowing that they are only temporary troubles, and we must trust Him in everything. He wants to lead us out of the darkness to dwell in His house forever, and that is where my joy is found. So, what was the point in all this? I asked that same question, and I got an answer, and it was joy. This has been a lesson in finding my joy, and now to do what I am supposed to do as a Christ follower and share that joy. And here it is. God tells me that I am his child. I am a daughter of the King. Now that I have burnt the ships of my past, I can focus on what he has in store for me and my future. And the world has become a lot less scary. Now, I have this phrase on my desktop background, and I've put it in my office before, and it says, when I feel inadequate and unloved and unworthy, I will remember whose daughter I am, and I will straighten my crown. How much joy is in that phrase? Thanks.